Hello, Kubernetes world. Welcome to the second edition today of Meet Our Contributors. Today is March 6th. We do this every month on the first Wednesday of every month at 7:30 a.m. Pacific and 1 p.m. Pacific time. This is recorded as well and will be posted to YouTube. So if you miss something, feel free to go back and get it. First off, thanks to the folks that are joining us today, taking time out of their day to help us understand Kubernetes upstream contributing a little bit more. That's awesome. We have a saying in this community is that you can't know everything, so don't even try, but these folks are here to at least help you get unblocked in whatever area that you are in right now. Also, thanks to George Castro, who is our VJ today, helping us out with the YouTube stream to make sure that is going awesome and to make sure that you can hear us and all that other good stuff. George works at VMware. Thanks for George's time, VMware. All right. And then, of course, we do have a code of conduct today that's valid on all of our channels. That goes for our panelists as well as the people that are participating, answering questions or asking questions. How to participate. Today we are doing a few different ways. One is through our Slack channel, and that's Meet Our Contributors on the Kubernetes Slack. If you're one of 60,000 people, feel free to access that there. There's also a discuss thread on discuss.kubernetes.io. That's our web forum that we use. Feel free to ask questions on the thread that you'll see in the contributors channel there. And there's also Twitter stuff floating around in Twitter space. DM me there if you see anything. So short story is get us a question and we'll figure out how to answer it. And we already do have a few questions that are queued up. Which is awesome. But first things first, we're actually going to do some intros really quick. Let's see. Dims, you start.
Hi, my nickname is Dims. I have a longer name, so ask me on Slack if you want to know. I work on a few things here. Mostly, I try to look for problem areas where other people are not working on stuff, or maybe things that have gone bad, stale, and no one has taken care of it. That kind of stuff. I like to do that kind of work. So I work across a few SIGs, like SIG testing and SIG release, and I'm on the steering committee as well. I work for Huawei, and thank you.
All right, Sally.
Hi, I'm Solly Ross. I work primarily on custom controller tooling, so I'm one of the lead maintainers for the KubeBuilder project components. I also used to work on auto-scaling and metrics a lot more, so I know a lot in those areas as well.
Awesome, thank you. And again, I'm Paris. I work at Google, do fun contributor experience related stuff like this. George, do you want to wave? Yeah. Wave, George. He's behind the veil. All right. And so again, we've already got some good questions queued up here. And every time I get a DM, and again, it's okay if you're anonymous, I'll just post it for you in the Slack channel. So the first question today, what's one thing you wished you knew about contributing in the beginning that would have helped you more get started, I guess, on board faster, ramp up quicker?
Solly, you want to go first?
Sure. Let's see. So on main Kubernetes, like the list of scripts that take forever to run versus the list of scripts that you can run quickly, and like when you generally have to run the scripts that take forever to run. So like some of the, especially for a while, some of like the code generation scripts took forever, and like a lot of times, most of the code generation isn't relevant to your PR. So like figuring out like, okay, if you're just hacking around and you're trying to get things working, like you can just run this individual code generation tool as opposed to all 10 of them that take like 10 minutes to run.
Yeah, like what are your top 3 that you usually run for a PR, Solly?
So if you're working on like an API change, so things like the deep copy gen code, which I think is behind update code gen, is probably like the really big one, and or updating like the conversions if you're working on API. If you're not working on an API change, chances are you don't need to touch most of the code gen, and just making sure to like manually run stuff like Go format on the individual files you changed. And then, like once before you submit your PR, then do like a run through of like making sure you haven't missed like a bunch of the Go format, or like making sure you run update Bazel just before you push your PR to make sure you haven't missed any of the Bazel file updates or something like that. But in the meantime, for most changes, I'd say probably just making sure you're updating Go format individually, and save most of the generation scripts for the end.
Right. Yeah, matches my experience exactly. So for me, the people here are very welcoming, but they need to get to know you. So you have to kind of say what your background is and how you could be helping, because otherwise they don't know you and they don't know when to call on you. And that takes a little bit of a time. So don't be shy. Introduce yourself at meetings. When the SIGs have meetings, and show up on pull requests and issues. Even if you have reviewed something and you do not, everything looks good to you, just leave a note saying that you've reviewed it, and what you like and what you don't like, what you can do better. So, some information about yourself, and so people can know that you are actually looking at things and what kind of things you're looking at, so we can call upon you the next time when we need you, essentially.
Awesome tips. All right. So another individual would like to know one very specific way that you know off the top of your head right now in which someone can start contributing at this moment. So just a quick example.
Typically, what we point out is look for an issue that. So the best things to work on are the things that affect you. If you see a problem, like yesterday, we broke a script, a bash script, when we were making changes for something. And typically, you would have found it if you caught it, just after that change got merged. So things like that, right? There is always things, just due to the velocity of the project. There are things when we start making changes in one place, it might affect other places. So, sorry, going back. So you try to fix something that matches your needs. Say you're working on OS X, try to get something working which wasn't working before. Say you are using a feature and there is like some small thing that's bothering you about like a field in one of the APIs or something like that. So try to work on something that is a problem to you, and that you've seen that will help you as well as others. That's what I would recommend.
Scratch an itch, even if it's just like Tim said, even if it's just like, oh yeah, this script like assumes something that's not true about my system and is just something reasonably easy to fix, or like this test, I was looking at this test to try to figure out how this feature was supposed to work, and the test is really hard to follow, and I think I could refactor it to make it easier to follow. If you happen to be interested in an area that also has good like help wanted or good first issue tags, look to see if those are available. They're not always available, and sometimes can be hard to apply them, just depending on like whether or not you have a lot of issues with like design nuances in them or stuff. But like if you're in an area, look to see if they're there, and those are usually just chime in and be like, I want to take a look at this. I'm going to start working on it, and start taking a poke at it.
What's one good first issue that you have out there right now for someone?
I think we have a couple in the Cube Builder project that are like, this is a helper or a utility or a feature that like people have asked for a couple of times that would be relatively easy to implement. I can actually see if I can drop some links in the chat if people are interested.
What's Cube Builder?
So Cube Builder is a sub-project of Kubernetes API machinery that is designed to make it easy to write custom controllers and operators. So sort of demystifying the use of the Kubernetes API machinery for writing extensions or even Kubernetes-like things.
Awesome. Maybe we can put you on the spot later and do a little code base tour.
Sure, I'd love to.
I'm like dying to put people on the spot to do those things. Jim just I see Jim's smile. All right. All right, next question. Figuring out who owns something for review isn't easy. Any tips? So I guess from a current contributor who's looking for some reviews and not sure of where to go exactly.
Right. So here are the breadcrumbs for it, right? So you say you're making a change in a subdirectory. Go look at the owner's file that is there in subdirectory. It typically has a list of reviewers and approvers. So go look there first. Then if it's not there, then go up the directory hierarchy till you find one, right? So that is one technique. The other technique is to have a general idea of which SIG this could be belonging to. So there are individual people who are reviewers and approvers, and also the code belongs to a SIG. So you have to kind of figure it out. And if you can't figure it out, just ask us. The third tip is look at the Git blame history of people who have touched that code, right? So between these three things, you should be able to get a good idea of who will be a good set of people to talk to. The other tip is when the bot picks up your PR, it automatically assigns folks as well, or it'll tell you to assign people, and it'll give you some clues on who might be a good fit. Sometimes if you're making a large amount of changes, what we call root owners will get invoked, because the bot is trying to select a minimum set of people, and if you're touching a lot of files across multiple directories, then it'll ask somebody who like Brian or Tim or somebody very senior who will need to you need to pull in. But typically what we would do then is either break the PRs into smaller PRs, or if that's feasible, or actually try to find some time on their calendar.
So just following up on what I promised a moment ago, it occurs to me that actually a few of our good first issues were actually just taken. So I need to go through and triage and make sure I haven't missed any more. But another option is to kind of, so for areas that use the priority flags, look for things that are like marked as not like immediately critical urgent, because those are, or important soon, but like maybe important long-term, which kind of means we want to do this eventually, but it's not like our immediate priority. And then that probably means that there's some good room for you to take some time to get to know stuff and like figure stuff out. And so I'll drop a link, but there are a couple of pretty clear ones ranging from like we should have better examples of how to use the context argument with our clients to like, oh, we need to figure out how to fix up our testing infrastructure to switch it over from Travis or something like that.
Right. So another thing that I'll give you an example is, say you want to figure out how the code base is structured, how things are put together. Go look at the vendor directory and look at all the dependencies that we drag in, right, from other Go projects, and then try to search and figure out where those files are the packages that we vendor in are used, and see if those vendor projects are really needed or not, and whether you can just write a new function to replace one entire library, because from the library only one function is being used. Things like that you can do to familiarize yourself with the code. Also the build process, and looking at the logs, what failures to expect, what failures you will see, and kick the tires. That's a good way of trying to do stuff. Just cleaning up the vendor list.
Good tips. And that actually flows in nicely to the next question. And this person sounds like they're sort of confused about the groups of Kubernetes in general. So like, what's this, like, tell us a little bit about DIMS, and I think you're going to be perfect to answer this. Like, what's a SIG, what's a working group, what's a sub-project? Just at like a high level breakdown of what some of those groups are.
Right. So we've had SIGs for a really long time. SIGs are special interest groups. So basically, the way it is structured is, the steering committee is responsible for the whole of Kubernetes. Then the steering committee kind of like divides up the responsibilities to different SIGs. To be able to do this delegation, the SIG has to write a charter and say, this is what we are responsible for. For example, you can look at the charter for SIG storage or SIG node, or any SIG release or SIG testing, and they will say what pieces of Kubernetes that they own. So once the steering committee approves the charter, then the SIGs essentially can go do what they want to do. And to do what they want to do, essentially, we are talking about creating Git repositories, setting up CI jobs, owning code, owning releases, building container images, shipping container images, release artifacts, you name it. Those are all things that SIGs work with each other. For example, SIG node works with SIG testing and SIG release, for example, right? So that is the overall structure between the steering committee and the SIGs. And to organize the work within the SIG, you can have sub-projects. For example, if you take SIG cluster lifecycle, right? It has a number of projects, including like Minikube, Kind, KubeADM, and things like that. So each of them are sub-projects. We are trying to exactly nail down what a sub-project is. I don't believe we have a PR up for that yet. But the idea here is you have self-governing smaller groups within a SIG that own specific repositories, and they publish a time when they meet. They take meeting notes, and they own code and go about their business. And so the sub-projects roll up into a SIG, and the SIGs roll up into the steering committee. One more thing.
Okay.
We have one more entity that is crawling in right now, which we call user groups. Is that what we call them? I think so. So the user groups are. Is that what we call them, Paris? Yeah. Okay. So the user groups are more like SIGs. They used to be SIGs, like SIG Big Data, which didn't own any code. So what we are trying to do is turn them into like informal birds of feather kind of an organization where They can meet, they can talk, they can do white papers, blog posts, and whatnot, but they don't really own code. If they have to do any work, then they work through existing SIGs. We also have working groups, which essentially span multiple SIGs. For example, there is a working group that I'm leading where we are essentially trying to take control of the infrastructure that we rely on for the day-to-day business of Kubernetes, from Google infrastructure to CNCF infrastructure. So, and that spans multiple SIGs. And by definition, the user groups and the working groups do not own code or release artifacts. Sorry, Solly, please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, no worries. I was just going to give some concrete examples. So, for example, the subproject that I help lead. So, for instance, you have SIG API machinery, which is the SIG that is in charge of everything having to do with the nitty-gritty bits of interacting with and building the Kubernetes API. So, from the parts on the server that actually generically serve APIs for different Kubernetes resources, to the bits on the client for interacting, the standard clients for interacting with those APIs. All of that is owned by API machinery. And then, so the sub project that I help lead, Kube Builder, is kind of specifically designed around, can we make this experience easier for people who are not used to developing on Kubernetes, and even for people who are used to developing on Kubernetes, because parts of the API machinery is a little bit arcane. So clearly that's under API machinery, right? Because it's dealing with how you interact with the API, but it's its own kind of sub-contained thing, its own kind of sub-contained project within that SIG.
I was trying to share my screen. I was about to share the SIG list and stuff like that. But I actually wanted to recycle a question from this morning's session because it was so vaguely good. It actually brought out some really good responses, I thought. And the question from this morning was, name one thing that you think is a priority for the community to focus on right now. So nice and vague, yet we'll capture what we think is a priority to you.
So the priority to me is trying to encourage people to participate and own pieces of things that we do, and trying to do that so that it gives more. We are growing like crazy. No questions asked. If you look at anything from number of Slack interactions to the code or the number of users or whatever statistic you take, we are growing like crazy. And we need to have a structure in place where we are promoting people. People are doing the work and they are getting recognized for the work that they are doing, and they have a ladder to aspire to within the project, and how they can do better, for their own career as well as for the good of the health of the project as well. That I think is my first priority at this point.
I think we have, so a lot of parts of the Kubernetes project kind of grew organically, and so we have a lot of things that are parallel implementations of basically the same thing in slightly different ways, or things that should probably be refactored out into helper functions and more clearly like documented on why particular things are the way they are. And there's a lot of that kind of scattered around the code base. And I think actually taking the time to stop and refactor those out and make sure that we're making use of things like refactoring copied code out into functions and separate objects. I think A, that cleans up our code base, and B, it makes things a lot more comprehensible. So like to pick on the controllers, because I spent a lot of time there, there's a lot of controllers that have copy and pasted kind of this this way we write controllers, where you set up some informers, which produce events, which you then add to a queue, and then you pop stuff off the queue, and you make decisions on whether or not to do stuff with that. There's a lot of duplicated code, but it's all done slightly differently, and it means that people going in to contribute are going to have to know how to filter out this is all the common code versus this is like the actual meat of the controller that I actually want to care about looking at. And B, they have to learn like, okay, this bit of code and this bit of code, even though they look like they're different, are actually doing the same thing because they popped into existence at different times in the project. And so I think we can, if we clean some of that up, we can both like reduce the barrier to entry and end up with a cleaner and more comprehensible and potentially easier to improve code base in the long run.
So we always like bring up refactoring a lot when we're talking about how people can help, but refactoring does have some kind of level of knowledge about the thing required. Is there anything that we can point people to right now that we know needs refactoring, and any tips that we can give them to get up to speed about the thing? Or are there any tips on how people can just, I guess, get up to speed about whatever the thing is that they're looking at in general?
Some of that is like knowing the right people to talk to. So like, for instance, one of the working groups that's working on a number of refactors right now is the component standard working group. And so that's kind of working on refactoring out some of our common infrastructure, like how do we set up logging and flags across all of our binaries? How do we move from flags to declarative configuration files for some of our binaries? And some of that's like large, overarching, how do we design all of Kubernetes kind of things? But there's a lot of, within those bits, there's a number of small things that are like, okay, we know this particular combination of behaviors is kind of hacky. We'd like to make it clearer. And so like show up there, for instance, and say, hey, is there, like, what do you need help with? Is there something that I can help? Other than that, like,
I can give an example.
Concrete?
Yeah, okay, I can give another example similar to what you were saying. So typically, Kubernetes is tested on GC, GKE kind of environments, but a lot of people use these things on AWS and OpenStack and other places too. So one thing that we are trying to do is like remove code actually from the Kubernetes repository and run them as like separate binaries, which is specific to your own cloud, right? So the idea here is what you can do is, say you're using the cloud provider against one specific provider, which is not highly tested. So then what you can do is you can see if the external cloud controller of the same thing has all the features that you need. And if something is missing, then you can work with us to figure out what is the right way to do it. For example, one example would be you are using a storage provider. So then we have to go check if there is a CSI driver for it. If there isn't one, then write one. If there is one, then test it, right? So there is CSI drivers, CNI drivers, CRI drivers, which are all specific to different components. So we will not be able to test all these combinations across the combinatorial explosion, right? So what you can do is you can test these things in your own environment with your own combination and see if these things work, and tell us what doesn't work, and maybe do a small patch, and contribute that way as well, because we don't have access to everything around the world, and we'll need your help trying things out as well.
I think that's a great example of a case where, like, if you don't have a lot of knowledge of Kubernetes, but you do have a lot of knowledge of some other domain that intersects with Kubernetes, you can put that knowledge to good use in learning Kubernetes and in helping out the community.
What's a part of the project that you wish you had time to contribute to?
I'm trying to do this, but I'll need more time, which is conformance. So how do you make sure that anybody who is working with a vendor get the same experience when they use the Kubernetes CLI or the API, and basically the functionality that they have access to? So conformance is tricky. We have a lot of vendors who have conformant Kubernetes distributions right now, but we have a lot of work to do in making sure what conformance means, and the coverage of the different APIs, coverage of different features, especially optional ones, extensions. We have a lot of APIs which are in alpha or beta. We have to get to the point where we push all the stuff that we have marked beta into GA, and then say, okay, this is the set of Kubernetes APIs that is going to be available across all the different vendors. And if I run this set of tests, then it gives me an assurance that I'll be able to do the same thing if I move to another provider. But then you will run into all these issues about, but I'm using this storage vendor, but I'm using this networking thing, but I'm using this other thing. So how do we test for conformance? So this is a different mindset is required here, and not many people are working on this, and we would really like help, if you're interested in this area.
That was a really good high-level conformance description too. So props to you, Dims.
Thank you.
What about you, Sully? If you had some more time that was just shut off the clock.
So I have a few things. I sometimes collect like little like quality of life things that I'd like to help out with, but like always run out of time. So like our test infrastructure currently doesn't expose the intermediate, like, so when you write end-to-end and integration tests in Kubernetes, we use this tool called, this testing framework called Ginkgo, which I think is actually really awesome. It lets you write kind of BDD style tests. And one of the tools that it has is it has this function called it. And it is kind of like a comment that gets exposed out into the test framework. So if you, for instance, like if you're writing a test and you say it should do blah 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 blah, you can then write like sublines in that saying by this, by that, and so like let's say you have a test like client.get, you're saying describe client.get, it should fetch the object from the server and deserialize it into Go type, right? And so you might say by constructing a new REST client, by making a call to the server, by checking that it actually deserialized the right information. Those bylines are ideally help you figure out like where the test went wrong within the test. And our test infrastructure, because of the way we generate our test output, doesn't expose those bylines very well. It exposes the it statement, but it doesn't expose the underlying bylines. And so like when a test fails, those could potentially be really useful in figuring out why it failed. So I would love to go and fix that. And I have a few things like that are just like all right, these are like things that I've noticed or that I've talked to other people about that are like little nits across the project.
Yeah, some of these myths take a lot of time too, right, Solly? If
Yeah.
the typical error is something timed out, what the hell timed out, right? And then you scratch your head and go through the logs and try to figure out,
and, Yeah, it's something like that could turn into a long, like, and those can actually be interesting places to get started, right? Because like they might not be initially the best, like immediate, I'm going to turn around and get something submitted, but sometimes they end up taking you through an accidental tour of the code base, and you end up learning about all sorts of things that you didn't know before. So you might end up learning, like with the Ginkgo one, like you might end up learning, okay, how do we turn our test output into structured test output? How does that get fed into our testing dashboard? And so you might end up being like starting out like, oh, I'm just going to make sure that bylines are exposed, and you end up learning how Kubernetes does its testing.
I'll give you one more example, right? Flakes. We are beset with flakes. Flakes are essentially tests that pass most of the time, but they fail some of the time. So and we do have dashboards which surface the data, which CI jobs are flaky, which tests are flaky in these CI jobs. So we need kind of like bug hunters who are willing to take this on and try to figure out what to target all the top flakes and try to figure out a way to make sure that we can get rid of them. So that would be a very interesting thing to do. So this would be like trying to figure out what is the frequency of the flakes. Do they happen? Do they have how many? Which kind of jobs do the flakes happen in? Is it specific to a cloud provider, or is it not specific to a cloud provider? So you have all these things that you can try to narrow down, but it will also help you to learn, go through the code base, look at the E2E tests, how the E2E test works, and then what are the logs for a good run, what is the log for a bad run, and then trying to pinpoint to the point where you can say, okay, this is the file, this is probably the method where wherever something is triggered is failing, and then you have to go through logs and try to figure out, is it a timing issue, is it something, that's how that's basically the process that you go through to find and fight a flake. If Aaron was here, he would give you a much longer speech on how to hunt for flakes, but you'll have to do with me.
Aaron's here in spirit, by which I mean he's been dumping helpful links and information into the Meet Our Contributors channel. So and also a video on walking through tracking down flakes from the Contributor Summit. So if you're interested in that, there's a bunch of links. Aaron's Slack handle is spiffxp. So if you look for the spiffxp messages, you should see some really awesome information.
He's hilarious. I think there's like 8 Aarons wandering around Earth sometimes. It's like, oh, there's Aaron. Popped up.
Well, we also have an Aaron emoji, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. Aaron of the sick beard.
So anyway, that was a good question, right? I
yes,
think that's
it
was. Good. I usually like try to veer away from the broad, ambiguous questions, but I was like, this is really good, actually. So tell us a little bit about steering committee, Dims. What's going on with you all? Any latest and greatest updates?
The steering committee. The steering committee is trying to, what is it trying to do? We used to have a product security team. We turned it into a committee. So that's just a logistical stuff that we had to take care of. So one thing that is also happening is we have been talking about bug bounty stuff. So you will hear some of it coming through soon. Then the other thing that we are talking about is what is a working group, how to form them, how to disband them, right? Like you start something, but then you have to wrap it up too when the work is done or when people are no longer actively doing stuff. We have to formalize what is a sub project as well. That is another thing that is important. But just recently, we were working with all the charters from different SIGs and making sure that everybody has a charter and their charter is approved. So that was the big thing that we were doing. What was the other thing? The other thing that we are kind of investigating is CVEs. If you have not been under a rock, you would have heard about all the different CVEs that we have been fighting with against as well, right? So we have a lot of dependencies, vendor dependencies that we're talking about, right? How do we already have a process for security disclosure and stuff like that. And we have a security team in place, and we have processes in place to and a secure test environment where people can go try things out, and a disclosure mechanism by which people are notified, and there is all kinds of stuff that usually happens in a security process. um, yeah, so CVEs. So we are trying to figure out how we can get a better handle on our vendor dependencies, especially if there is something like, for example, we vendor in Docker repository, we vendor in libcontainer. What if there is a CVE in one of those dependencies? How do we track them? How do we get notified when there is a problem somewhere else in the ecosystem, Golang ecosystem? And how do we set up the communication mechanisms and the notification mechanisms so we can go proactively figure out how to fix the problem in our use of other people's code? Does that
Very
help?
awesome. No, that was good. That was very comprehensive. And well, the announcement that you have public steering committee meetings now too, and that contributors can come voice their business there, correct? Yeah.
Absolutely. It's every other week. It was supposed to be in the same time slot as this one. So the next week, you should come to the steering meeting and watch this on video, right, Paris?
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
So, but yeah, really, the steering committee has a public mailing list. The steering committee now has a public meeting. We do have a document where Google Doc where we can raise things in an agenda. Feel free to find one of the steering committee members, and we can add whatever you want to talk about on the agenda, and then we can talk about it in the meeting. Feel free to ask questions, introduce yourself when the steering committee meets as well. If you have some business, just say, hi, this such and such, and I was interested in whatever question you wanted to ask. So please be vocal, please step up. We need you, and we don't know who you are, so please take the first step forward from your side, and then hopefully we'll be able to engage you.
It is not that scary. Contributor experience goes for business all the time. Anyway, Solly, have you had any direct interaction with the steering committee?
Not really. I mean, I've interacted with most of the steering committee members, but not usually in steering committee capacity.
Do you think it's important that the average contributors stay in contact with what's going on with the steering committee?
I think it's useful to know what's going on. Some of the steering committee stuff affects the kind of broader vision of the project. So like kind of keeping an eye on what's going on, looking at emails or meeting notes, or like keeping an eye on discussions can be useful.
Right. So it's when you have to escalate stuff from the SIGs or the working groups or the user groups, typically we have two destinations, either the SIG architecture or the steering committee. The steering committee tries to stay away from the technical decisions, and vice versa. So again, so you go to, if you have like an issue saying, how the hell do we install CRDs at when Kubernetes starts, and Solly is in that mix as well, right? So Solly ended up going to SIG architecture, and then there was like options discussed, and a decision taken, and there is a Slack channel for CRD installation as well. Solly, you want to say something about it?
Oh no, I was just waving because I'm involved.
Yeah. So yeah. But that's the way it works. So if you want to escalate, then you talk to the SIG leads and take the matter to the SIG architecture. There is a mailing list. I know that it's not convenient for everybody because of time zone issues or timing issues. So please use the Slack channel. Please use the mailing list, and then throw things onto the agenda with enough information so people can. And possibly delegate somebody to go talk on your behalf if you're not able to make it.
I think this is also a case of like, maybe if you're just starting out on contributing to Kubernetes, like you might not need to care as much about the steering committee or SIG architecture immediately. But like as you get more experience with the project, if you decide, hey, like I kind of want to keep an eye on like some of the meta questions of the project as a whole, not just like my particular area, but like things that affect the entire project, it can be really interesting and enlightening to start even just like listening in on meetings or reading through what the meeting notes and the decisions were. And maybe you see something that you're like, conformance, this is really cool, I would love to start helping out with conformance. And so you see something that you're interested in, you find another kind of larger project area to contribute to. And also, like in general, as the project leadership tries very hard not to bite. So like all the SIG leads and the sub-project leads and the steering committee members are all people, right? So feel free to approach and say hi if you have questions or whatever.
Right. The other tip I can give you is about how do we work, right? So typically you file an issue and then you have a discussion in a SIG meeting. You throw it open to other people by writing an email to the mailing list, maybe even Kubernetes dev. And then when you have some kind of consensus, then you write a cap. And when you write a cap, that's when people will have to like agree to what you're saying or disagree. And then, depending on the dispensation. So once the cap gets to implementation stage, then you can go forward and, do the PRs, maybe even request feature branches or create new repositories. That's when you will need the help from the SIG architecture or the steering committee, depending on what you're trying to do there.
Aaron has yet again helpfully linked in the what's a CAP. The TLDR of that document is CAP stands for Kubernetes Enhancement Process. And a CAP is basically a design coupled with a plan for moving that design from kind of the conceptual phase up through the implementation, the testing, the documentation writing, and kind of a larger grouping of those things together so that we can keep track of them and how they evolve.
Right. But remember, it's not a waterfall model where you are trying to do everything up in front. It's a living document. So once it merges, you still have to keep updating with the research, the options, and which one got picked. And so it's a living document which will also help the SIG release and SIG testing and the people who put out blog posts once we do the release to figure out what exactly are the changes that ended up in a specific release.
And even contributors going back and looking at like, hey, why did we decide to do this thing the way it is? It's kind of weird. Hopefully the idea is that you can go and look at the KEP that introduced it, and you can see, like, this is how it ended up the way it was. It was originally proposed like this. We considered these options. We decided that these other options weren't good, so we went with this one. We started implementing. It turned out that like we needed to make some tweaks because of user feedback, and so we eventually ended up with this.
Right.
Yeah, and I just checked all of our platforms, all million of them, and it looks like there's no more questions. Let me just do one final sweep. If you have any questions for each other, now is the time. Forever speak your piece. George, you have any questions? Last call. All right. Nope, I don't see anything on any of them. Somebody's dying to know if Kubernetes is a distro or a kernel. So I don't know. I don't know if we should end it there.
So you should join we have a working group called LTS. We are putting out a survey. Find the survey, fill it up. So we will be able to, when we have the survey results, you will know what we are or what we want to be.
I think we would all love to figure out the answer to that question. So any way that you can help plan that out would be great.
Right. For sure. We need to figure out what LTS means, and what are the things that we have to do to be LTS, and what would it look like. So there is a working group. So please come join and help make progress on that.
That's the chair of the LTS group paid me to say that. So enjoy your sponsored ad. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, no, but that does wrap up the March editions now that we've been through both of them of Meet Our Contributors. Next April, I know we already have a code base tour lined up. We've got some really awesome stuff. Again, our episodes are 7:30 in the morning Pacific time, 1 p.m. Pacific time. Please feel free to reach out to us with questions, concerns, comments on how we can make this better for you all. But at least 100 of you will watch this episode right now. So hello to all 100 aspiring and current contributors. And that's it for us. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Solly. Thanks, George. Thanks, Paris.
Yeah.